At the end of World War II, Americans were convinced that they were about to be in a showdown with none other than Joseph Stalin. And we decided that we needed an array of allies, not to stand with us or stand behind us, but to stand in front of us, between us and the Soviets. As a result, we crafted what we now think of as the global order of globalization, where the United States will use its Navy to patrol the global oceans for anyone, so that everyone can ship anything from anywhere to anywhere else without having to worry about piracy or privateering. And that ultimately gave us this map. Now, the light blue, those are the countries that we cared about here in the United States before World War II. And the green were the new allies in this new global order, the first global order. But everyone else was on the outside. In fact, most of those red countries were on the other side. And so, what we did bit by bit from 1946 until the fall of the Berlin Wall is we invited other countries to join. And those are the yellows, and you'll notice that involves the Chinese. Now, the countries that benefited the most from this new structure were those that were either too resource poor to be able to challenge the major naval powers, countries like Germany, or those who had weak geographies that made them prey to those empires, places like China. And so, with the global order, for the first time in their existence, China and countries like them could access resources and markets without needing to secure them militarily. And that changed everything. That gave us the world that we know. But that world is over. Remember, this was a security program. It ended at the end of the Cold War in 1989. And since then, the Americans have been steadily reducing their troops ever since. We had a hiccup when it came to 9/11 and the following wars in the Middle East, but for the most part, the Americans have come home. Our troop deployments globally are now at the lowest level since the 1920s. And everything that's left of the system, everything that's left of the world that we think that we know, is simply running on inertia. And perhaps the worst part for the non Americans in the world is that the US really doesn't care. And it has to do with who might be able to pick up the mantle. Now, what we have here are two carriers. The one on the left is a supercarrier, the one on the right is a traditional jump carrier. On the deep blue sea, without support from land based aircraft, it takes 7 jump carriers to fight off a single supercarrier. Now, there are 11 jump carriers, excuse me, there are 21 jump carriers in the world, 11 of which are American. There are 11 supercarriers in the world. Every single one of them is American, which means that if you sailed the entire navy of the rest of the world against the United States, it would only take one, maybe two aircraft carrier battle groups to carry the day for the Americans. There is no country that this century can hope to displace the Americans on the waves. And the United States is the only country that can make the system work. But it's also the only country that doesn't need it to work. The United States designed the global system to fight a war. It did not do so as an economic investment. And Americans have collectively decided that our security issues are local and regional, not global. So we're out, which means that the global system has lost its designer, its broker, its investor, and its protector. And that, all of that, is just the first factor. Geopolitically speaking, the world that we know is artificial. It's ending, and it's bending back towards something that, historically speaking, is a lot more normal. That means less interaction. That means less trade. That means financial shortages. That means less integration. That means less growth. And remember, that's just the first point. Second, you have to look at demographics. Now, this is the demographic of Mexico. What we've got here are children on the bottom, young adults, mature adults, retirees at the top, men on one side, women on the other. Mortality tends to build it into a pyramid. Now, when American business leaders and politicians look at something like the Mexican demography, we kind of like what we see because all those young people are relatively low down on the value added scale. They're relatively new to their jobs. They don't add a lot of value to their products. That's not what Americans are good at. We're very highly educated. We're very highly motivated. We're very high value added workers. And so the propensity to trade between low end Mexican manufacturing and assembly and high end American manufacturing and design is huge. It's an excellent relationship. It's the most robust trade relationship in the world. Second, Mexicans are young. And when you're below roughly age 40, it's all about the spending, buying houses, buying cars, raising kids, spend, 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 which means that Mexicans absorb a lot of American imports. This is a beautiful relationship, honestly, from an economic point of view, not that there aren't complications. But again, this is what we look for in a trading partner. And this is not. The Koreans had a baby bust back in the 1980s. They never recovered, which means they've got a lot of people aged 40 to 60, which means these people have already sent their kids on. They're off at college or beyond. They're not buying a lot anymore. And because they've been in their jobs for 20, 30, 40 years, they're very high value added. They're going head to head with the American workforce. So a trade relationship with a country like South Korea is very problematic. Now, for the last 25 years, 40 years, from 1980 to roughly 2015, the world demographically was in a beautiful moment. All of the world's economies were either consumption led like Mexico's or export led like South Korea. And so there was a good balance of trade, a lot of economic activity, a lot of things flying back and forth across the oceans. What we have here are the demographic pictures of some of the major economies in the year 2000. It was a perfect balance, excellent for globalization. But 20 years later, we're all 20 years older, and that balance is gone. A lot of those consumption led economies have aged into being export led. And a lot of those export led economies are aging into post growth. We are no longer in a system where everything's in balance. The global demographic of high consumption was already ending, and courtesy of COVID, it's likely already over. As to the export led economies, they're aging into mass retirement, they're post growth. The year 2022 is the year that most of the advanced world shifts from being export led to post growth. And COVID has robbed us of the time we had left to prepare for that transition. Now, the United States isn't cleanly in one of those two categories. Its demographics have slimmed, but it hasn't inverted. Now, our baby boomers are still aging into mass retirement, and just coincidentally, that still happens in the year 2022, along with the rest of the advanced world. But America has something going for it that the rest of the advanced world doesn't. Millennials. We might think of them as annoying, and we might not like their bedazzled flip flops or all those goddamn scooters, but they exist and they're having children and they're buying homes. And from a consumption point of view, that makes them the single largest market on this planet. And it will remain the single largest market on this planet for at least another 15 years. I hate to say it, but millennials may just save us all. Because I need to give you an idea of just how sharp this is going to be. Let me give you an idea of scale. Now, in 2020, the United States is the only large consumption-led economy that's going to remain a large consumption-led economy in 2030. What I've done here is I've stacked up all of the world's 100 largest economies, which make up 95% of global economic activity. And in the first column, you can see where everybody is now. And in the second column, you can see where everybody will be in 10 years. Now, there's 1,000 ways that we could do this and quibble with some of the specifics. So this is just using the data we have available today. But if you look at where the export-led economies are, they age into obsolescence. That entire category goes away. Now, right now, Japan, the world's largest and fastest aging demography, the world's largest collection of old folks and the fastest aging demography, it's really the only post-growth economy we have. But by the time we get to 2030, not only will the Chinese and the Europeans have joined them, but we will, as a planet, have aged past the point where the economic structure of today is even theoretically possible. And this was all before COVID took away a year or two of consumption and a year or two of production and more than a year or two of financial capacity. We will never return to where we were in 2019. That model's gone. Betting on globalization now is like betting on buggy whips when the Model T started rolling off the line.